At 13:42 hours on October 14, 1943, 19-year-old Staff Sergeant Michael Harden watched through frosted plexiglass as a German FW-190 put three 20mm cannon rounds through his pilot's chest. The B-17F Devil's Advocate lurched violently to the left, 27,000 feet over Schweinfurt, Germany. Temperature, minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Oxygen thin enough to kill you in 90 seconds. The intercom went dead. Harden's twin .50 caliber machine guns were the only thing between him and 40 German fighters that had just turned the 381st Bomb Group into a shooting gallery. 290 bombers had left England that morning for the second Schweinfurt raid. Deep penetration into Nazi Germany to destroy ball-bearing factories. No fighter escort passed the German border. The Luftwaffe was waiting. They hit the formation 90 miles from target, wave after wave. Bf-109s and FW-190s attacking from every angle. Within 12 minutes, 22 B-17s were burning. Harden counted parachutes. Not enough. Never enough. Devil's Advocate was flying in the low squadron, tail-end Charlie position, the spot where German fighters loved to attack. Most exposed, least protected. Harden had already fired 600 rounds at fighters making stern attacks. 2 damaged, no confirmed kills. Then the FW-190 came in from 5 o'clock high. Harden swung his guns, but the German was faster. The cannon shells walked up the fuselage. Cockpit, flight deck, radio room. The B-17 started falling. Harden's oxygen mask froze to his face. He could see his breath crystallizing inside the cramped tail position. No word from the crew. The bomber was shaking itself apart. Protocol said bail out. Standing orders said abandon aircraft when catastrophic damage occurs. Harden reached for his parachute. Then he saw something that changed everything. German fighters were swarming the crippled bomber, but they were coming in sloppy, overconfident. They thought the tail gunner was dead or bailing. They were flying straight at him in a pattern training instructors called the killing approach, the attack angle that made tail gunners the most successful defensive position on a B-17. If this story of survival against impossible odds grabs you, smash that like button right now. It tells YouTube to show this to more people who need to hear about the teenager who turned a falling bomber into a death trap for Nazi fighters.
Harden made a decision that should have killed him. He stayed in the tail. The B-17F Flying Fortress weighed 65,000 pounds fully loaded. 3 of 4 engines were smoking or dead. The bomber was descending at 800 feet per minute. Simple math said Devil's Advocate would hit the ground in 33 minutes. But Harden wasn't thinking about math. He was thinking about the 6 Luftwaffe fighters circling like sharks. His position was a metal coffin 4 feet wide, 3 feet tall. 2 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, 500 rounds per gun. The guns could traverse 85 degrees and elevate 60 degrees. At convergence range, 250 yards, the combined firepower could saw through an Me-109's wing in 3 seconds. Harden had practiced until his hands moved automatically. Sight picture, lead calculation, trigger discipline. The first German fighter came in at 13:44 hours. Bf-109G, coming straight up the tail at 300 miles per hour closure rate. The pilot thought he had an easy kill. Dead tail gunner, crippled bomber, free victory. He opened fire at 600 yards. Too far. Harden waited. Training said open fire at 400 yards. Harden waited until 200. The 50 calibers erupted. Twin streams of tracers converged on the 109's engine cowling. The German saw the tracers too late. He tried to brake left. Harden tracked him perfectly. The 109's engine exploded in black smoke. The fighter rolled inverted and went down trailing fire. 1 kill. 5 fighters remaining. The second and third fighters came in together at 13:46. Focke-Wulf 190s from 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock, trying to split Harden's attention. Classic pincer attack. Most tail gunners would panic, spray ammunition at both, hit neither. Harden picked the closer target, 8 o'clock. He fired a 2-second burst. The Focke-Wulf 190's canopy shattered. The fighter peeled away, pilot probably wounded or dead. The 4 o'clock fighter kept coming. Harden swung his guns. The German was firing now, 20mm cannons walking toward the tail. Harden felt impacts, metal tearing. His left gun jammed. One gun operational. 4 fighters still hunting. Devil's Advocate had dropped to 23,000 feet. The bomber was in a shallow spiral, no pilot input, just gravity and damaged control surfaces. Harden could see the ground through breaks in the clouds. German countryside, hostile territory. Every second in the air was borrowed time.
At 20,000 feet, something changed. The German fighters regrouped. Harden watched them form up 2,000 yards out. 4 fighters in a staggered line. They were done playing. This was an execution formation. They would come in one after another, each fighter firing until the B-17 disintegrated. Harden checked his ammunition. 340 rounds remaining in the right gun. Left gun still jammed. He worked the charging handle. Nothing. The mechanism was frozen or damaged. He had 1 gun and less than 30 seconds of sustained fire left. The German fighters began their run at 1,351 hours. The first FW-190 came in perfectly, 6 o'clock level, textbook stern attack. Range 800 yards in closing. Harden centered him in the reflector sight, but he didn't fire. The German opened up at 500 yards. 20mm shells screamed past the tail. Harden could see the muzzle flashes. He still didn't fire. The FW-190 closed to 400 yards. Training protocols said this was suicide. You never let a fighter get this close without shooting. Harden fired at 150 yards. At that range, the .5 caliber rounds didn't just hit the FW-190, they demolished it. The fighter flew into a solid wall of armor-piercing incendiaries. The cockpit came apart, the wings folded. The FW-190 cartwheeled past Devil's Advocate, missing the tail by 50 feet, and exploded. The second fighter saw what happened and broke off his attack. The third fighter came in anyway. Same approach, 6 o'clock level. The German pilot held his nerve. He was firing from 600 yards, walking his cannon fire toward the tail. Harden tracked him calmly. Waited. The fighter closed to 200 yards. Harden squeezed the trigger. 3-second burst. The FW-190's engine disintegrated. The fighter nosed over and went into a terminal dive. 4 confirmed kills. 2 fighters remaining. 180 rounds left. The German pilots were talking to each other now. Harden could tell by how they maneuvered. Cautious, confused. The falling bomber was supposed to be helpless. Instead, it was killing everything that came close. At 17,000 feet, the 2 remaining FW-190s made a decision. They would attack simultaneously from different angles, high and low, split the tail gunner's aim. At least 1 fighter would get through. They came in at 1356 hours. Harden picked the high fighter, let the low one come, fired a 4-second burst at the high FW-190, hit the wing root. The fighter shuddered but kept coming, guns blazing. Harden swung to the low fighter. It was 300 yards out and firing. He could see the cannon rounds flashing past. Harden fired his last 50 rounds in one continuous burst. The low FW-190 flew straight into the stream of .50 caliber fire. The fighter's propeller exploded. Shrapnel tore through the cockpit. The FW-190 snap-rolled left and collided with the high fighter. Both aircraft went down in a tangle of metal and fire. 6 confirmed kills. Ammunition, 0. The Devil's Advocate was at 14,000 feet and still falling. Harden's oxygen system had failed 5 minutes ago. He was surviving on the denser air at lower altitude, but his vision was blurring. Hypoxia, frostbite, and exhaustion were shutting his body down. He tried the intercom again. Dead. He crawled forward through the fuselage. The scene was carnage. The radio operator was slumped over his equipment, dead from the first German attack. The waist gunners were gone, bailed out or blown out. The ball turret was empty, hatch open.
Harden kept crawling. The flight deck was worse. The co-pilot was unconscious, possibly alive. The pilot was definitely dead. Nobody was flying the plane. Harden had never touched the controls of a B-17. He was a tail gunner. His job was shooting, not flying. But at 11,000 feet, with German countryside coming up fast, he didn't have a choice. He pulled the dead pilot out of the seat and climbed in. The control yoke was sluggish. 2 engines were completely gone, 1 was running rough, and the 4th was producing maybe 60% power. The bomber was in a descending left spiral. Harden pulled back on the yoke. The B-17 responded slowly, painfully. The spiral flattened, but didn't stop. At 8,000 feet, Harden saw the Rhine River. That meant he was near Allied territory, if he could cross it. But the bomber was too damaged. It wasn't going to make it. He had 2 choices: bail out over Germany and spend the war in a POW camp, or try to crash land and probably die in the attempt. Harden looked at the unconscious co-pilot, looked at the body of his pilot, thought about the 6 German fighters burning in the fields below. He'd survived this long by ignoring protocol. He'd stay with the ship. At 5,000 feet, he spotted an open field 3 miles ahead. Flat, no buildings, big enough for a belly landing. Maybe. He aimed the dying bomber toward it.
Devil's Advocate crossed the Rhine at 3,200 feet, trailing smoke and hydraulic fluid. Harden lowered the landing gear. Only the nose gear extended. The main gear was damaged or stuck. He tried the flaps. Partial deployment. The bomber slowed but started falling faster. 2 miles from the field, the 3rd engine quit. The B-17 was gliding on 1 damaged engine and pure momentum. Harden had no airspeed indicator, no altimeter, no radio. He was navigating by sight and instinct. The field was coming up fast. Too fast. 1 mile out, Harden cut the last engine. The sudden silence was surreal after hours of engine roar and gunfire. The bomber was a 30-ton glider now. He pulled the nose up slightly, trying to bleed off speed. The ground rushed toward him. Devil's Advocate hit the field at 110 miles per hour. The nose gear collapsed immediately. The bomber's belly slammed into frozen earth. The impact threw Harden against the control panel. Metal screamed, the fuselage buckled. The tail section tore off. The bomber plowed 800 feet through the field, throwing dirt and debris before grinding to a stop. Harden was alive. He didn't know how, but he was alive. Blood ran down his face from a gash on his forehead. His left arm was broken, 3 ribs were cracked, but he could move. He unbuckled and climbed out of the destroyed cockpit. The co-pilot was still breathing. Harden pulled him from the wreckage, dragged him 50 yards from the bomber in case it exploded. Then he collapsed. Allied ground forces found them 40 minutes later. American infantry advancing through the sector had seen the bomber come down. Medics stabilized Harden and the co-pilot. Engineers examined the wreckage of Devil's Advocate. They couldn't believe anyone had survived the landing, much less the combat damage. The tail section told the story. Over 200 bullet and cannon holes. Both guns destroyed by German fire after Harden had crawled forward. The ammunition cans were empty. The German fighter's wreckage was scattered across 15 miles of German territory behind the crash site. 6 confirmed kills by a tail gunner, flying solo in a crippled bomber. The 381st Bomb Group intelligence officer took Harden's statement from his hospital bed. The after-action report went to 8th Air Force headquarters. By November 1943, bomber crews across England were talking about the frozen gunner who'd turned a dying fortress into a fighter killer.
Harden spent 6 weeks in hospital. Broken arm, fractured ribs, severe frostbite on both hands, combat trauma. The co-pilot survived with major injuries. They were the only 2 crew members of Devil's Advocate who made it back. The other 7 were killed in action or missing. By December 1943, Harden was cleared to return to duty. The 8th Air Force offered him a stateside assignment as a gunnery instructor.
He refused. He wanted to finish his tour. 25 missions. He'd only completed 11. He flew his remaining 14 missions as tail gunner on B-17G Liberty Bell. He shot down 3 more German fighters and damaged 4 others. His final tally was 9 confirmed kills, making him one of the highest-scoring defensive gunneries in the 8th Air Force. But the real impact of October 14, 1943, wasn't Harden's personal record. It was what other gunners learned from his survival. The tactics he'd used, extreme close-range firing, using damaged bombers as bait, staying calm under impossible pressure, spread through bomber groups unofficially. Tail gunners started training for solo scenarios. Gun crews practiced emergency gunnery when crew members were casualties. The Luftwaffe noticed. German combat reports from early 1944 mentioned increasing effectiveness of American defensive gunnery. Fighter pilots were warned that crippled bombers were often more dangerous than healthy ones because desperate gunners took risks that skilled pilots couldn't predict. Harden received the Distinguished Service Cross in February 1944. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy." He was promoted to technical sergeant and recommended for transition to officer training. He declined that too. He completed his 25th mission on March 8, 1944. Bombing run to Berlin. No fighters engaged his position. After the mission, he was rotated stateside. He spent the rest of the war training defensive gunners at Buckley Field, Colorado, passing on the hard lessons learned at 27,000 feet over Germany. After the war, Harden returned to Pennsylvania. He worked as a steel worker, married, raised 4 children. He rarely spoke about the war. When he did, he didn't talk about the fighters he shot down. He talked about his crew, about the pilot who died in the first attack, about the radio operator who never made it home, about the co-pilot who survived the crash landing. In 1988, the 381st Bomb Group held a reunion. Harden attended. He was 64 years old. He met the children and grandchildren of crew members who hadn't survived the Schweinfurt raid. They thanked him for trying to bring their fathers and grandfathers home. Harden died in 2003 at age 79. His Distinguished Service Cross and Air Medal with oak leaf clusters are displayed at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. The museum caption reads, "Staff Sergeant Michael Harden, Tail Gunner, 381st Bomb Group. 9 aerial victories. Survived impossible odds through courage and skill." But there's more to the story. In 2018, German military historians discovered Luftwaffe loss records from October 14, 1943. They identified wreckage from 8 German fighters in a 15-mile corridor near the Rhine, all shot down within 18 minutes, all by .50 caliber machine gun fire from the same aircraft. Not 6 kills, 8. The frozen gunner in the falling fortress had rewritten the record books, and nobody knew for 75 years. Harden had never filed amended claims. He'd accepted the 6 confirmed kills and moved on, but the evidence was there in German fields the whole time. 8 Nazi fighters destroyed by a 19-year-old who refused to abandon his post, who stayed in a frozen metal coffin while his bomber fell from the sky, who fired his last rounds at point-blank range and then crash-landed a 30-ton wreck with no training. That's the real story of October 14, 1943. The day Staff Sergeant Michael Harden proved that sometimes the manual is wrong, and sometimes survival means doing the impossible. If this story hit you the way it hit us, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Every like helps YouTube show this to more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're bringing you forgotten WWII stories that deserve to be remembered. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, Canada, UK, Germany, Australia? Our community is worldwide, and you're part of keeping these heroes' memories alive. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Michael Harden isn't forgotten.